Welcome back to another video. Today it is a bit of a different format. I have a bike which has the new Pinion Smart Shift, and I thought I'd bring you along a ride, talk about the advantages and disadvantages, especially compared to the mechanical version. I even prepared, let me see, a note. There's quite a lot to talk about actually, so I hope you get a good understanding about the pros and cons. The bike is from Tout Terrain. It is the Outback version, so the most mountain bike-like one. And whilst I do work for Tout Terrain, my opinions are completely independent, as this video is only about the Smart Shift Pinion version. Also, this is my first video being in front of the camera, and I have tried and film like that for a while, but I haven't felt comfortable with it. But I do want to make more videos than usual, and I think that is the quicker way. I hope to get used to it. Tout Terrain, I make all the bike consultations, I talk to the customers, do the bike configurations together with them, and it's completely different talking to a person because the camera is just, it doesn't react in any way. So let's get started. You can get the Pinion Smart Shift in the 6, 9 and 12 speed version, not in the 18 speed, because the 18 speed has a different housing. It is CNC machined, and therefore the part where the shifting mechanism is attached is part of that housing. Therefore the Pinion version is still only available in the mechanical version with the twist shifter, but I don't think that's bad in any way, because most people who choose the 18 speed, they go around the world. They also then have the advantages of the mechanical version, but most will probably use it either for city bikes where the 6 or 12 gears will suffice, or for more sportive application, the 12 speed is the best anyway. Here on the Outback I have the 12 speed version. That means 606% gear range, 17.7% gear step in between the gears. The difference between the E-Shift and the mechanical version isn't the mechanics in the Pinion itself, it's only the way it shifts. You have the twist shifter from Pinion, or there are also alternatives like we offer from Tout Terrain, the new trigger shifter. But instead of a cable actuated shifting, the E-Shift has a trigger which operates electronically. The E-Shift doesn't only look a bit different, but it's also called differently. It has an I at the end, so instead of C1.12 as the mechanical is called, it is the C1.12i. The I probably stands for intelligence or something, whatever. As I said, looks wise, the difference is in the shifter itself. It is a trigger shifter, not a twist shifter. It has a wire running from the shifter to the gearbox itself. And the gearbox has a little motor on its side which shifts the gears for you. Noticeably, the biggest difference between the mechanical and the electronic version is that you can shift under load, or at least it seems like that. Because it has the same mechanics in it, there actually isn't any difference between the shifting mechanism itself. It's just that the electronic version has magnets on the cranks, and when a bike manufacturer sets up the bike, depending on in which degree the pinion sits in the frame, it's being aligned in such a way that the sensor in the pinion detects when the cranks are horizontal, and then it shifts. That's also what I recommend to do with a mechanical version, shift when the cranks are horizontal. The actual difference is that on the E-Shift you don't have to get used to that, whilst on the mechanical version it might be a bit difficult at the beginning until you get the idea and get used to shifting like that. The downside of that is that when you shift under load, where it's not possible, there will be a delay of that few milliseconds until your cranks have turned to the horizontal position. And that is actually what I really like on the mechanical version, that if you are able to shift, it shifts immediately. And in this case, you just have to decide what is more important to you. Being able to shift under load, or presumably, and might have a delay whilst doing so, or choose the mechanical version. You might not be able to shift under load, you won't be able to rotate or to pull the cable. But if you are able to shift, you will be able to shift immediately. Regarding shifting under load, I have noticed that when standing, I normally have one foot on the pedal and I'm standing on the other leg, but sometimes even only the weight of my leg is enough to prohibit being able to shift. It is possible, but for example now, you can hear it, it doesn't really work. And you have to take that load off, which is something I could imagine being annoying. I will now test how well the E-shift is going to shift under load. So I'm going up a slope here and I'm going to try and shift like an idiot essentially. So I'm trying to shift whilst being in the 3 o'clock position, and let's see how well it will perform under such load. I'll test how well it is able to shift the whole way down. So starting from a really big gear. That doesn't really work. Okay, well apparently it has failed completely. If I press the buttons, nothing happens. And the LED on the pinion is blinking red. Yeah, that was probably too much. But no one would shift like that, so there is a limit to it, but you bet that when you would shift like that on a chain drive, it would also have its problems. You might even damage some parts. The good thing is, even though it doesn't work, you don't have to worry that you are breaking something. Well, I think I just found the way to solve the problem. As I was just about to take the camera off and film it, it then worked again. And I think the problem was that whilst I was standing here explaining the problem to you, I still had my foot on the pedal and therefore it couldn't readjust itself. As soon as I got off, it started working again. So it's really not that bad. Because if you shift like that, which you shouldn't, and you most definitely wouldn't, hopefully, then you can't damage it. It will shut itself down, but as soon as you take the force out of the system, then it will readjust itself and work again. The trigger shifter, it's really well designed. It's really ergonomic. You have 2 buttons which have a rubber coating or like a solid rubber on it. Therefore you have a really good grip on them with gloves or without. Even when you're sweating, you will always have a firm grip on them. You're able to mount the shifter to 2 versions or to 2 positions, and you can choose depending on your hand size or things you've got on your handlebar, which is nice to have. The buttons give a really nice feedback, which I appreciate a lot, because especially on a mountain bike when going over rough terrain, it is nice getting the feedback that you initiated the shift. Sadly, you can only shift once at a time, and that means if you need to shift many gears at once, you really have to get used to press the button quickly. I have tested the new Shimano Di2 mountain bike group set, the XT version, and I really appreciate the ability to double press the button to shift 2 gears at once, and that would be a great update. Or alternatively, enable multi-shift. So when you press the button for longer, that it shifts down or up multiple gears at once until you let go. Sadly, it hasn't got none of that, therefore you have to get used to shifting quickly. You can assign the 2 buttons. I have chosen to reverse them so that the lever on the back shifts to a faster gear, whilst the lever in the front shifts into a slower gear, which is the same as most mechanical triggers. But if you have, for whatever reason, gotten used to the exact opposite, you can just change that in the app. What happens to me relatively often is, even though I have assigned the triggers to be in reverse, it does happen to me that I do it the wrong way around and end up either going into a lighter gear even though I want to go to a faster one, or vice versa. And that's something that also happened to me when using the Di2 XT version, and I think that's because on a mechanical trigger shifter, when shifting into a faster gear, you release the cable, and with the other trigger you pull the cable, and there's a noticeable difference when shifting. But I think you just have to get used to that. Some people who don't like the twist shifter, they argue that you might accidentally shift gears whilst going over rough terrain. I personally have never had an issue with that because my hand is relatively small, but I could imagine that if you have big hands and they reach over to the actual twist shifter, that you can by accident shift, which is annoying and something that will definitely not happen with the E version. Another benefit of the trigger shifter, which is called E1 something, is that you can choose your handlebar grips as you wish. On the twist shifter, you always had to be careful to get grips which are small enough, and on the electronic version you can go with any grip you want. Another thing which I find a huge advantage is that you're able to mount inner bar ends. I have them on 2 bikes and I think they are great for having a second hand position, especially when touring. It's a great way to relieve your hands. Also different to the twist shifter is that you don't know in which gear you are. Whilst you are able to see that in the app, it's so small that you aren't able to read that off the screen when you're cycling. And on the twist shifter, you've got those numbers on its side. Therefore, when starting, you know in which gear you are. Whilst on the E-shift, well, you just have to find out. It's also something which I don't think is a big downside, as the benefit of the gearbox is that you are able to shift while standing. Therefore, if you notice when starting that you are in the wrong gear, just stop for a second, shift and then continue. Another big difference is the noise, and if you just listen to this, I don't mean that banging, that is normal and that can occur on the mechanical version as well. It's just that motor that actually then shifts the gear for you. For me, as someone who has been using mechanical shifting up to now, it is something I really have to get used to and which is a bit annoying. And generally there are no rights or wrong here. If you are someone who likes going on tour or do bikepacking, probably the mechanical version is better suited for you. It's nice that it's quiet, especially when trying to enjoy nature. What makes this smart shift so smart is that there are 2 modes which can shift semi-automatically. So there's no full automation, meaning that you can dial in your cadence which you'd like to continue throughout the ride and it would shift automatically the whole way. But on the smart shift you have the semi-automatic shifting. One of the modes is start select and the other one is pre-select. And start select, as you could imagine, is the semi-automatic mode when starting to cycle, and that means when you come to a stop there is a certain gear to which it will shift, so that when starting again you have the correct gear selected. You notice that it took a few seconds because sometimes one brakes, for example, but then wants to continue, it doesn't shift immediately down to the start gear, but instead takes a few seconds to actually acknowledge whether you've come to a full stop or whether you wanted to continue straight away. The pre-select mode refers to when you are coasting and you are either getting faster because it's steep enough, or you might get slower because you've got rolling resistance and wind resistance. So either way, whether you're going to get faster or slower, there's a little magnet on the rear rotor and a sensor which runs along the chainstay, and it notices how fast you're going, and because you can also select your preferred cadence, it will shift into that gear which is most comfortable for you to start pedaling again. Both of these semi-automatic shift modes I think are rather for urban cyclists, especially for those who cycle a lot. Forgetting to shift is something that doesn't occur often, but there may be certain circumstances where one just does forget, and then it might be helpful that it shifts automatically. But I would probably never use the start select, as it has happened to me that when I started again, then it shifted down, which is the exact opposite of what I want. The pre-select, on the other hand, is something that might come in very handy, something I'd actually like to use, but I wish they would have offered the option of only offering the mode that it shifts for you if you're coasting and not also include the start select. But I must say, for me, shifting manually is no problem. As I said, probably more for urban riders than for the sportive ones. Also, the start select isn't very reliable. One thing I mentioned earlier, if you come to a full stop, most people will stand something like this, one foot on the ground whilst the other one is on the pedal. The weight of the foot and the leg being on the pedal actually prevents the gearbox from shifting, therefore it then doesn't even work. Having the magnet on the rear rotor does mean that you need a 6-bolt rotor, and because many bikes, especially modern ones, use center lock instead, you might end up with 2 different standards on your bike, having center lock in the front and 6-bolt in the rear. Interesting to see is how small the gap is actually between the crank arm and the motor. It's even difficult for me to get on video. Here you can see it pretty well. I am glad that the shifter isn't wireless, otherwise you would also have to replace the battery now and then with a shifter. Also, they would have probably had to build the whole gearbox bigger in order to add a sensor which would transmit or receive the signals of the shifter. And I think that because there's no more room down there, that they decided to go with a cable. Now every bike manufacturer has to put the battery somewhere, and depending on frame materials, it is possible to put the battery inside the frame, or as Tout-Terrain does it, set it outside. Because Tout-Terrain uses steel frames, the tubing is rather small, therefore it's not possible for us to put the battery into the frame itself. I find the system great because you can easily access the battery, take it off and on without having to fiddle it in and out. The solution on this bike does take up the bottle holder on the seat tube. I think a way that possibly might also work is to put the battery on top of the cover. It would still be in the way of the bottle holder, but with an adapter you could just set your bottle on top of it, and then you'd just have more space on your frame. I know that Pinion has received lots of feedback regarding the size and shape of their battery, and I could imagine that they will offer either another version or update their existing one, so even manufacturers which produce steel frames are able to integrate it into the frame. What I also find very annoying is that huge charger. Firstly, they use a proprietary plug. You can't charge it with USB-C. There might be some reasons for that, but it's just so outdated in my opinion. And also from the aspect of touring, bikepacking, having to carry that big charger with you is just really inconvenient. I'm not sure how expensive it is to carry a second battery and whether you can even get one, but even if you don't want to carry two of them. So I hope that they will eventually update to USB-C. Otherwise I don't really see the system being compatible with touring or at least light bikepacking. Compared to the e-Shift, where if your cable breaks, you probably won't find replacement easily. On the mechanical version, you can take off the lid of the shifter box and actually shift with a 3mm Allen key, whilst on the e-Shift you have the problem that you won't find replacement. You could eventually break a spare part, but that is always the question: how much spare parts do you actually want to carry with you? If you're going beyond Europe, for example, it might actually make sense of taking a spare cable with you. You might ask yourself whether you can retrofit the electronic version. If you perhaps have a gearbox already and you now want to upgrade to the electronic version, that's not possible. As I said, the mechanics are the same, but still the whole housing is different. Therefore, you sadly can't upgrade. You have to choose right from the start. If you're thinking about getting a bike, then you have the choice. If you have, I don't know, just money to spend, you could get the whole kit. So the frame is compatible to both, so the mounting itself, that stays the same on the mechanical or electronic version. Whilst I'm actually getting electronic shifting on another bike now, it does have its downsides, and especially on a gearbox, in my opinion, where you want to rely on the system and which does promise low maintenance, it just is a bit contradictory that you have to charge it. But overall, I'd say it just depends on how you're going to use the bike. And on a commuter, for example, the advantage of a mechanical version is that you don't have to charge it. It will always work reliably. But the e-Shift is great for if you do sportive riding and want a bike that is still very low maintenance. Whilst editing the video, I noticed that I didn't do an end card. So if you have any questions about the Smart Shift, then let me know in the comments down below. If I missed anything, which is possible, also let me know, and I will probably do a follow-up video discussing those topics. Overall, my take on this is more from a bikepacking and touring standpoint, which is also what I had in mind when talking about the pros and cons. Just if you are going to use it in a more sportive style, then some things might not bother you. Also, I was thinking about doing some live streams perhaps, where we could discuss those topics together. You could ask me questions, I could answer. That makes sense. Let me know what you think of that, and we'll see. Perhaps I will make that possible in the nearer future. That's it for now. It's a pretty long video. Hope you stick to the end, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!